Hey Internet friends! Last night, President Donald Trump announced the continuation and expansion of U.S. military intervention in Afghanistan, reminding everyone that 2017 marks the 16th year that the United States has been in the South Central Asian country, making the war in Afghanistan the longest war that America has ever waged. A war that the media claims has no end in sight, leaving many to wonder if this war is really just about terrorism. Which is why today we're going to uncover what the media won't tell us about Afghanistan.
Good afternoon. On my orders, the United States military has begun strikes against al-Qaeda terrorist training camps and military installations of the Taliban regime in Afghanistan.
I said a long time ago one of our objectives is to smoke them out and get them running and bring them to justice. We're smoking them out, they're running, and now we're going to bring them to justice. I also said we'll use whatever means is necessary to achieve that objective. And that's exactly what we're going to do. The American people must understand that we've got a long way to go in order to achieve our objective in this theater.
It's important to lay some sort of historical foundation for Afghanistan, even in accelerated history like I'm about to give, as it gives context to the United States' current conflict, context that the media rarely provides. Afghanistan won its full independence in 1919, after a century of dealing with British antics, their invasions, and their puppet leaders. For about 40 years, things were all right under the leadership of King Zahir Shah. Well, until he got ousted by his brother-in-law, Daoud Khan, in a bloodless coup. However, the brother-in-law didn't fare so well, as he and his entire family were killed by the Afghan Communist Party about 5 years later. With the new leadership came new policies, and while they attempted to implement practices and policies like upping literacy rates and making boys and girls sit in classrooms together, ultimately Afghans weren't a big fan of their new government, mainly because it was against their religious beliefs, and they, along with the Afghan army, revolted. As a result, the Soviets intervened, resulting in between 1 to 2 million civilian deaths. While the media wants us to believe the U.S. intervention began post 9/11, Operation Cyclone, the code name for the CIA's program to arm and finance jihadi warriors in Afghanistan between 1979 and 1989, began with President Jimmy Carter. The program continued under President Reagan, and essentially, Operation Cyclone created and funded an army of jihadists to fight the Soviets in Afghanistan, and ultimately the Soviets pulled out of the country in 1989. So the United States has been in Afghanistan for nearly 40 years, arming the religious fanatics. During the time between the communist government collapsing in 1992, the fractured country had jihadi factions that fought amongst themselves for control, ultimately leading to the rise and control of the Taliban, which enforced Islamic Sharia law. A month after the 9/11 terror attacks, President Bush announced the beginning of the war in Afghanistan, citing al-Qaeda, a terrorist network of Islamic extremists and jihadists, as the organization who orchestrated the attacks. And 16 years later, the United States is still in Afghanistan, with worldwide terror at an all-time high.
I ordered an additional 30,000 American troops into Afghanistan. When I announced this surge at West Point, we set clear objectives: to refocus on al-Qaeda, to reverse the Taliban's momentum, and train Afghan security forces to defend their own country. I also made it clear that our commitment would not be open-ended and that we would begin to draw down our forces this July. Tonight, I can tell you that we are fulfilling that commitment. Instead of going down to 5,500 troops by the end of this year, the United States will maintain approximately 8,400 troops in Afghanistan into next year through the end of my administration.
Situated right between Iran and China, and serving as a prime hub from which to run operations in the Middle East and Asia, Afghanistan sits atop a wealth of untapped deposits, like gold, copper, iron, and lithium. Above ground, there's an abundance of opium in the form of poppy fields. In fact, the production of opium is and has been at an all-time high since the war in Afghanistan, leaving U.S. soldiers to patrol those poppy fields as the Taliban stands to benefit from the opiate trade. Though, side note, it's important to note that the Taliban outlawed opium in 2000. Who else could possibly benefit from Afghanistan's drug trade? If you're familiar with the allegations of the CIA's involvement with the crack epidemic that struck America back in the 80s and 90s, where the CIA trained and funded Contras, or the rebel groups of Central America that smuggled drugs into the United States to support their war efforts, it's not too far of a reach to suspect that the CIA is up to their same old stuff, utilizing the spoils of war, which, in this case, would be the poppy fields, to finance and further their agenda, as there still exists a drug epidemic in America today, and a war on drugs that lines the pockets of the private prison lobby. And the United States isn't the only country affected by the heroin epidemic. Around 80 tons of heroin, mostly produced in Afghanistan, are consumed in Russia annually, and the country is thought to be the main victim of the drug trade in Asia. I'd like to reiterate my previous point. Afghanistan is strategically located between Iran and China, with which the United States has rising tensions due to nuclear deals and the fall of the petrodollar, as well as their alliance with Russia. Well, that's the tension I gathered from the media, the majority of which is under the control of the Zionist elite. So who knows if the headlines they're cranking out are true, as the agenda is clearly geared towards endless war, particularly in the Middle East, fracturing countries beyond repair so the Zionists can expand. The war machine can chug on with a NATO base in Afghanistan, established for launching attacks on Russia so the military-industrial complex can continue to make a killing. Reported in 2014, the State Department had given 69% of its funding for Afghanistan to DynCorp, a private government contractor with its fair share of sexual abuse allegations, including child prostitution and human trafficking. DynCorp is only one branch of the military-industrial complex that has quite a bit to lose from the United States withdrawing from Afghanistan. After all, would peace keep these contractors in business? Would peace line the pockets of those who manufacture missiles? What interest can be made off of loans to all sides of the war if there is no war? If nothing is destroyed, what can be rebuilt?
My original instinct was to pull out. And historically, I like following my instincts. But all my life, I've heard that decisions are much different when you sit behind the desk in the Oval Office. The security threats we face in Afghanistan and the broader region are immense.
If you look around, we've got a flavor of terrorism for every demographic. The Taliban in Asia, ISIS in the Middle East, and now in the Philippines, and foreign as well as homegrown terrorists in the United States, all with a seemingly similar list of objectives. First, to cultivate a sense of terror and chaos within the civilian community through violence. Secondly, to fracture communities and create division amongst groups. And third, to destroy ancient and biblical artifacts in history, of which Afghanistan has no shortage. Whether it's Al-Qaeda, ISIS, the Taliban, the Ku Klux Klan, or Antifa, the main function of all these terrorist groups is to create a need for military intervention. War is a business, so who is funding all of it? Who is the biggest loser if global citizens are unafraid, just trying to live their happy lives? Who stands to lose the most from peace? Every day, we're terrorized by headlines relaying threats of war and the impending doom of World War III. But we've been in World War III since the Korean War, up until right now. Those who've made a business out of war cannot afford to have it end. Thus, here we are 16 years later in Afghanistan. And that's what the media won't tell you about Afghanistan. Why do you believe the United States has been in Afghanistan for 16 years? Let me know your thoughts. I always look forward to reading your comments. Thank you so much for subscribing and supporting my channel on Patreon. Bye!